what we believe love is. And today is no different. So today we're going to discuss reciprocity. And reciprocity is essentially, in my mind at least, the sharing and the exchange of privileges to an extent. The mutual nature of a relationship, the give and take, the back and forth. How do we coexist in any intimate setting? And that intimate setting could be a personal relationship, a personal intimate relationship, or the intimacy that's shared within a platonic relationship with close friends, right? So we're going to dissect that a little bit, because what I've seen is reciprocity, or the lack thereof, has led to the termination, let's say, of several relationships. And oftentimes people have the ability to feel used if they don't feel like their energy is being reciprocated. So we're going to explore those things, right? Let's create a scenario to start, so that some of the listeners have an idea of what I'm talking about, and it's not set in abstraction. So let's say, for instance, you and I, okay, so I'll use a real life scenario. You and I are very close, and I might be doing something on the road, 1 a.m., tire get blowed, so I'm flat. I'm in the countryside, no bus running, I don't have my wallet, wherever the vibe is. The first person I'm going to think of calling is you. I'm going to say, yo, let me hit T-Bo. Yo, bro, I in Taba, come check me. Now, 1 o'clock, I don't expect you to be up partying, so I know you're probably deep in sleep at that time, but I'm going to call you nonetheless because I need the strength. You're going to come and get me. And reciprocity would look like, if you are ever in a similar situation, you ever have that same level of need at that type of hour, you can also call me, and I will match your energy. I will come, and I will assist in the same way that you do, right? And we see a lot of situations where one person is always on the giving end, and somebody else, the other person, is always on the receiving end. Or, not always, but for the most part. Have you ever been in that situation? And if you have, how did it make you feel?
Well, before going to that, let's get some more clarity on the topic, right? Because is it more or less going the extra mile for that person? Because let's say that you have certain strengths and I have certain weaknesses, vice versa.
Right.
And let's say one of the things that I do is a strength of mine that you can't really match in essence. But even though you can't match it, the response is almost like to try your best. I go the extra mile, even if you can't match it. So you could register like, yo, I could really try. This ain't in my wheelhouse, but I try. You think somebody could register that as as reciprocity?
Meaning what? Meaning, okay, so let's say, for instance, we're talking about resources. So one friend is, in a better financial position than the other, and they're able to recognize, okay, my sister and my brethren look like they're struggling. Let me extend a hand. So let me give them some funds, because I see this month they look like things tight. Let me just give them $300. You're saying the expectation isn't necessarily for that friend that receives the money to give money back, but it might look like if they cook something that they know their friend like, they call them consistently and like, hey, come check me for this. Or if they have, let's say, their father into planting crops and they get some pumpkin or they get some whatever it is, they call that same friend.
Yeah.
So it's reciprocal in nature in terms of the sharing of the energy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that the resources or the services are aligned in that way.
Yeah, because it's almost like a kind of genuine give. Like it's supposed to be like a genuine give because, like you said, I might not have the funds, but, I might have produce. And I could just like pass it back and forth. So it's not even like you giving me one thing and expecting back that same thing to come back to you.
So the baseline might be, a willingness to share.
A willingness. I just go that little extra mile.
Yeah.
It might not be. Let's say that the same way. I'm not in a financial position, but let's say you need $1,000.
Yeah.
You gave me $1,000 before. Let's say you give me $5,000 before, and you need $1,000, but all I can manage to do is give you 500.
Yeah.
You know,
The 5 is appreciated.
the 5 of
Nonetheless.
yeah.
But and so that's what I'm talking about, is a willingness to share whatever you have.
Yeah.
Right? The willingness to share, and it could be money, time, resources, whatever it is.
'Cause I think sometimes people like that might share resources, right, with someone else, and expect knowing well that that person can't even like give that back,
Yeah.
right? And they expect the same, maybe sometimes even more, right, back, which in that person can't even give you that back. But then, is that a balanced relationship? Like, other can't match it other can't match the same thing, right?
So break that down for me. Someone is on the giving end, someone is on the receiving end.
Yeah.
What is the disconnect?
The disconnect is okay. You might know your friends. Like if you're around somebody and you have like a relationship with them, right? You will more than likely know them to a point. You're gonna know them fully, but you're gonna know them to a point where you're comfortable enough to share resources,
Right.
right? But you know that by okay, they're not the same position I had in life, right? Like I could just walk up and just give you a watch. Right? You might not be in a position to ever give me a watch. You give me, not even give me something material, but you might give me advice. You might give me some good sound, like good reasonings.
Our time.
Yeah. Right? So, is reciprocity like a match of the same thing?
No, I think if when you boil it down to its most basic components, I think it's exactly just that, the willingness to share. Your time, your resources, whatever it is, that willingness, and like you said, a genuine willingness.
So then if you're on the giving end and you start to feel like, like you're getting taken advantage of, that means the relationship is a different type of relationship then?
One-sided, yeah, for sure. If you have any sense of feeling that you are being taken advantage of in a relationship, then that relationship needs assessment. It needs to be reassessed.
Because this is the thing. You could feel that way, but the other person don't ever feel that way. Because then in their mind, they're not taking advantage of you.
It might be the level of consciousness as well. Because I think it's easy for us to also make people feel comfortable with asking us for things or asking us to do things, right? And because of that level of comfort, in their mind, they might also have issues with boundaries. So they don't really and truly know how to establish proper boundaries, or, you know what I mean? And even outside of the context of, let's say, aggressive or hostile situation where somebody is being intrusive and trying to go further than they should. Sometimes in casual relationships, people have the ability to kind of surpass with boundaries them, and like unintentionally. You know what I mean? They're not even paying attention to what they're doing. So you could create that dynamic where you have this person in your life, whoever they are, and you've always been there for them, right? Mm-hmm. And because you've always been there for them, in their mind, they develop an expectation that you will always be there for them. Mm-hmm. And so now they have no issues asking. They have no issues saying, hey, Tiba, why you come in hospital Friday? Irrespective of what you got to do, mm-hmm. right? So sometimes it might not be intentional. It might not be that they see it as using you. But at the end of the day, they're still using you. So whether or not they recognize what they're doing doesn't necessarily invalidate the truth of the circumstance, I believe.
But you don't think the using is based on like intent?
No.
Like using it doesn't come with a malice connotative type of.
I think that's how we frame it. Because I think you could use something without having any malice. Like, okay, let's say for instance, somebody has an animal, right? Mm-hmm. They have an animal, and so let's say it's a beast of burden, like a donkey. The donkey is something that this person, they have farm land in the mountain high. So they're using this donkey to go up in the mountain routinely, right? Regular. And some days they come down, and because they have their own responsibilities on their mind, they run and go and do whatever they gotta do, forgetting to feed the donkey. Right? They're using the donkey nonetheless. It's not intentional. I don't think they're willfully not feeding the donkey. But because the donkey has been so dependable over the long term, and they've grown accustomed to having the donkey around, they just feel like the donkey is part of the whole operation of things, right? And they don't see that there's also some maintenance that's required. And I think that's the part. People have the ability to get so complacent and so comfortable that they don't realize that, all relationships require maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, and in a relationship, same way too. You're gonna be used. Everybody gonna use each other in a relationship because it's much better to be useful than useless, right? So you're gonna, but I think it kind of boils down to even the reciprocity, like the response to it is almost sometimes as simple as just appreciation.
But you see, that's the thing. I think is the acts of service that we are able to identify is what leads us to make the assessment that whatever the sacrifice is that we're making for these people are worth it, right? Because the scales have to be balanced. So I think when you start feeling resentment or start feeling like there's no reciprocity, it's because the scales aren't balanced. Okay.
But I mean, and it's funny too because you go kind of, if you're looking, right? Because sometimes your strength could be just given, like you're just a given person, right? And you get with somebody and
they are taker.
They're taken by nature, right? But you're just so given, right? It's just like you're given. Okay, let's say that the person even attempts to say, let's say it's an intimate relationship, and your partner say, no, babe, I'm gonna pay for dinner tonight, right? Sometimes you could find yourself, if you're a given person, male or female, right? Be like, no, you save your money, I got it, right? And you could do that every single time you go, just like naturally, like, blindly, because you're not thinking about it like the person using me. And after a while, it just becomes almost like the norms. Like, okay, then, when we go, he or she likes to pay.
But I think that's different in an intimate relationship or a relationship with close friends. So, okay, let's look at it from the context of an intimate relationship. I feel like if two persons are in an intimate relationship and one of them has opted to be that person that always pays the bill, right? I think that decision comes from some level of understanding that I appreciate this person in this other way. So me looking for them to pay because I know when I reach home, but yeah, she'd always cook. Like when I get home, my wife to make sure, my girlfriend to make sure like food there for me. But I remember this time when I put the break and she really checked for me like heavy like that. So now you don't have that expectation of her ever paying the bill ever at all for the duration of your relationship because you've already made allocation for that. Now, let's think about it from a friendship perspective, right? You might have a brethren who, like we just discussed, you just know that by his financial situation ain't where it is, or ain't where he's supposed to be. I'm in a better position to pay right now. And you have that good-natured spirit where you're going to do that. But what if there is somebody that is a recent addition to the friend group and you and them went out? Does that person who is accustomed to be the person that pays all the time also pay for that person? That new friend, that new acquaintance, whatever you want to call it? Because then that's a different level of assessment. Are you worth this extension of my resources? Should I be paying for you all the time? Because me ain't sure how deep this relationship is. So I think a lot of times persons who are givers, unless it's something that they deem trivial, most people calculate, if they're willing to extend for, different people. Like, I'll give you an example. I know some women who are givers, like just their nature are givers. So people come by the house and they always offer them things. Or, hey, I bake, you want a slice of cake? Or they would just take it upon themselves to feed the neighbor who they just know is a shut-in, right? And they feed in that person all the time for years. Now, there's no requirement of reciprocity there because they have already made the assessment and determined that I doing this here as me good deed, or this benefits me in that it makes me feel good about myself. It makes me feel like I've done something good for another person, right? I think reciprocity kind of in a different vein because you remove the altruism from it. When you're looking at reciprocity, you're not necessarily being altruistic when you're doing certain things. Like you do it from the heart, but at the same time, it is in pursuit of something. The pursuit is probably the maintenance of said relationship.
Yeah.
But where is it going to go?
Because you think it's a tricky with relationships because, sometimes they say like close relationships, intimate, because you said that you don't give with expectations that you get back anything. But I think that when it comes to relationships, there seems to be a level of expectations to kind of get back.
Is it to get back though? Or is it for you to feel validated? Because sometimes people giving you or behaving a certain type of way around you makes you feel validated.
But that's to get back. You got to get back something, whether it be tangible or intangible, right? It's a get back. You know what I mean? Because let's say that... let's say that you're struggling. Let's say that your partner is struggling and she has a business idea and you want to invest. You invested in it. Let's say you invested $20,000.
Yeah.
Right? And the business take off and everything is done well, properly. And then afterwards, now you got a business idea. You need an investment and you need $8,000, right? $8,000. And
you know she got it. Yeah.
And then you go and ask her. But then she asks you what you want it for.
Oh, you see, that's... anyway, me gonna sit down here. But yeah, go ahead. I mean, so rough.
That rough, so just like, sometimes you kind of... It's almost... I remember I had this situation once with this owner of a company that I worked for. And I was green. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I had forgot my wallet at home. And we had developed a sort of cool enough relationship within the first 3 months, And I forgot my wallet at home. And I said, I don't even know what was in my mind then, but he taught me a lesson. And maybe that's what I needed, because that wasn't even something that I would normally do. So pulled him to the side and said, I forgot my wallet at home. Could I borrow $20? And then I'll give it back tomorrow. I was young, but you make mistakes, but it was a lesson in that. And what he told me is like, listen, I'll give you $20, right? But make sure you give me back. So when you give me back, you always got $20 in the piggy bank, right? So there's a expectation. But it was a balance to me. When I heard it, I was like, what, but that's really something that you could carry on, forward with even like a child. You know what I mean? But that's a lessons learned. So sometimes somebody might, give you something and, you could, if you're doing well, you could store it away, but a lot of people don't really think on that type of level. Especially, and, I think it depends sometimes on what people relationships are like.
That's it, because
to those
when you talked about supporting your partner and finding the resources, finding the $20,000 so that they could build a business, and their business is now profitable, and you're in a position where you have some need, and there is unwillingness on their part. In my mind, right, and this is just me, I can't speak for anybody else. In my mind, it means then that you didn't do the proper assessment. You didn't identify fully if that person has red flags or if they have, an ability to be greedy. I don't think you analyzed them well enough. Now, somebody might say, people could hide well, and you don't know.
And you can say to that, people, let's change and people, let's grow.
And so that thought came to my mind as well, because I know money changes people.
In the change, them, I can expose who they really are. Well, things, as people get more and more access to things.
And comfort, when they get more comfortable. So often when people get financially stable, they become different versions of themselves, right? Because now they don't feel beholden to certain people. So they don't see the value in certain things like decorum or manners or respect. You see a lot of people who get money and they start behaving differently, more grandiose, more disrespectful to maybe, let's say, a different socio-economic group.
Yeah.
So if they determine somebody poorer than them, man, Let us deal with you in a vile type of way. And if somebody who they feel like I'm more money than them, it's almost like a reverence in the approach, right? And we sit all the time, we hear the stories about it. But yeah, I think relationships require assessment though. Like you have to constantly be looking at the relationships that you're getting yourself involved in.
But yeah, man, and you see, yeah, that's you definitely have to. In terms of like anything close within that, that first layer of friendship.
Outside of friendship, I feel like we don't necessarily do those types of assessment. And I don't want to say this as a criticism because it's not me being critical. I've made those mistakes.
Everybody, yeah.
Several times, right? They are relationships that I had. Do I want to say I regret them? There's some level of...
Let's call them lesson learned.
Yeah.
Lesson learned.
Yeah, it's a lesson learned. Let's leave it there. But you have those situations where when you think back about it, you identify things that you could have done differently. You should have done differently. And because hindsight is 20/20, sometimes you look at situations, you look at interactions that you had with people, and in the back end, you say, well, how may I see that before?
Yeah.
How may I recognize that?
Because sometimes you get blinded by your own light, yeah.
Yeah. Or optimism, your own optimism.
But that's the light.
You're optimistic about who this person could be.
Yeah, man, you're blinded by that.
What they represent in your life. And you see people's potential, and you allow people's potential to blind you.
And we oftentimes too, like, paint people the way that we want to see them instead of accepting them for who they are.
That's true. But that's a hard thing to do.
Hard.
That's a hard thing to do. To accept people for who they are means it requires us to, one, approach without ego, and two, drop the expectations.
And
right?
it's tricky because that means sometimes you could watch a person and what does that mean? Does that mean that you don't believe that person could evolve? Are you gonna be along on the ride as they evolve and accept every version of themselves that they can give to you?
Give them room for that growth, but also allowing them to be authentically themselves, good or bad. And sometimes we try to suppress the bad, while encouraging the good.
What we perceive as the bad.
Yeah. And in that attempt to suppress whatever we deem bad, because what's bad for me might not be bad for the other person, right? They might deem that as cool.
So then that brings in a conversation about compromise on both sides, right?
The ability to make compromise in a relationship.
Yeah, any side of it, like
you see, but then compromise now can also feel like a relinquishment of your ideals.
Think so?
Yeah, man. I think
it depends. It depends.
It could feel that way. I don't think it depends on much, but I think it could feel that way. You could feel like you lowering your standard when you compromise for certain things.
You see, and that always is tricky because sometimes you could be holding on to the wrong ideal.
True.
But you're so identified with it that you see it as part of you, but you don't even know that that's something that you pick up from somewhere else.
Let me give you an interesting scenario. When you spoke about that, it made me think about a quality that I find endearing in a lot of people that I see. I've met some persons who have the ability to accept people for who they are without judgment, right? So, as I'm saying it, I could think about one person in particular that I've seen engage with somebody who, in my mind, just based on their demonstration, somebody that I would not necessarily engage with. Like they have a more callous nature. And what some of my friend do was they just engage with them on a human level, right? And while the callous side of that individual was still there, it was muted in their interactions with Mrs. Strin, right? Just how they interact was different. And they formed a really, really, really strong, meaningful relationship. So it's almost like her acceptance of this other woman allowed her to become a better version of herself. Like she didn't judge her for whoever she perceived her values or beliefs to be.
I think once you feel accepted, sometimes you kind of, it's almost like a permission for you to try other things, in terms of how you engage with people.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes too people act a certain way to either hide something or to protect something. But once you kind of reach a point, then you could reach to that person. It's almost like they kind of drop all of that protection and you see them who they really are, like under that shell.
But then it's different because you could accept somebody on a, let's call it a surface level, right? Where they become an acquaintance. Like you accept them to the point where you don't mind saying hello, or if you're in the same space, you can have like a surface conversation.
Like they
with
could
them.
come on your landing.
Right. But what you're talking about is a real deep, meaningful relationship, regardless of what this other person has done, right? And things that they say, the way that they behave, that are diametrically opposed to the beliefs that you have. Yet, in the midst of all of that, with all those competing viewpoints, you just accept them as a human being, and you just talk to them and laugh. And when they tell you about the dark stories, you say, you know, but that's crazy. I can't believe you did that. Ha ha ha. And then move forward and communicate with them on your level. So maybe it's knowledge yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe persons who could fully and truly know themselves and comfortable with themselves. I don't know what it is that gives certain people that ability to just have that appeal and that impact. But I find it to be incredibly admirable.
I mean, what do you think about the level of attachment to things? Okay, let's say that those same two people that you referenced, they're really close. They could talk about anything, open, right? But let's say that they have like a boundary in place. They don't know, like certain things just ain't gonna happen. And they know that, so they never even cross over that. So they respect the boundaries. So then it allows them to kind of be natural,
Right.
but knowing like, by now, we're not gonna go that far.
Right. Well, so here's the thing, right? I think that is, if you're an intentional person, that should be easy enough for you to achieve, right? If you're intentional. But to me, the deeper issue there is that non-attachment to identity. Because look at it from this perspective. Certain persons don't interact with others because they feel like they've worked their entire life to build up this ideal image, right? Yeah. So this is who I am. I am Dr. Lawyer, Indian Chief, right? I'm this person. And you are over here. You come from, let's say, the ghetto. You come from the hood. Yeah. You speak a certain type of way. You use profanity openly in public, those types of things, right? Those two people, based on the societal constructs, come from two different socio-economic groups, right? They come from two classes, essentially. The person that's on, let's call it, for the purpose of this conversation, a higher level, right? That is more entwined in society, is working the high-paid job, whoever the vibe is, right? For that person to be able to walk with the common man and really touch, not just walk, not just pretend, but really connect, like on a deep level, sit down and bang dominoes, and those people, they got different gear, bro, because they now don't have an attachment to how society perceives them. In my mind, I think they've determined that I've done enough work, I've done the groundwork enough, and I know myself enough that I don't even care about the societal judgment that might come from people seeing me with this person and, you know what I mean, interpreting that, okay, the two of us is the same. I am like them.
I mean, sometimes you look at people who just genuinely don't let, genuinely and naturally don't let societal like constructs like manipulate them, right? So even though, like say, that person might have went away to school and got degrees, working, got a certain job title and all that. They just see it, and then they have somebody like they go up in the ghetto with pussy, and now they elevate. In a sense, it's almost like, well, I just happened to get that opportunity. It could have been you, because the degree of separation is so you know, minuscule, right? That it could have been reversed.
Yeah, the coin could have spin anyway.
Yeah, and so it's just like that kind of genuine kind of person they don't tend to isolate themselves. They don't build that kingdom and a fortress around themselves, because if you do that sometimes, that's like debt to you.
But I mean, it's layered though. It's layered because, okay, look at it from this perspective. You have persons who are, let's say, intelligent. They're educated.
Educated,
rather.
yeah.
They're educated, not necessarily intelligent, but they're educated. But they come from that background, right? So they go to university, however it is, and they get back home, and okay, they have these friends that come from this space. There are some persons, I found, who, while educated, and they learn how to interact on a common level, they also don't fully and truly learn how to integrate into their chosen field. So what that means is sometimes you would see a professional, wherever the profession is, and if you hear like the common dialogue about them, if you hear people talking about them on the street, people would say, oh, he or she so ghetto. You know what I mean? Or he or she isn't necessarily professional. And right or wrong, you hear those things. I think the person who can interact on that level, right? Touch the common man, but still interact within their profession or on what we would deem a high level, seamlessly make that transition, that's a different kind of person. That person has a different gear altogether. And I think that gear comes from emotional intelligence. Now, most people with that high level of emotional intelligence, that high level of goal orientation, that level of educational prowess or acquisition, like they achieve this level, they have a master's degree or whatever it is. Though all of those things also bring with them ego. And
it could bring ego.
Most times they do. Look at anybody who in a high-powered position, high-powered job. Tell me if they don't give off like an unattainable, unreachable type of vibe. Most people who we would deem educated or who in like superior positions, they don't really interact with people generally. You know, they have their core groups of people who they would mess with, who they would talk to. But the average person can't really touch them.
Yeah, they kind of isolate themselves.
Right. But you have a one few who can function at that very high level and then still seem reachable. They still seem to be able to interact with everybody. And I feel like that is a different gear. I think that is, I don't know, that's like a different level of intelligence to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and you can't even say that's nurture too, because, you know, some parents might, you know, especially like in the ghetto context, sometimes you might see a parent trying to, you know, put a child on the straight and narrow path, and would try to block them from hanging out with people in the neighborhood, and almost like to create this kind of better than energy, mentality. Yeah. And you wouldn't expect that from such a, like, in being in the communal, like a small, like, nuclear type of setting. But it depends on how that child is wired, that could look past what the parent is trying to instill in them and, you know, delete that.
It depends on their ideals too.
Yeah.
Because some people, especially when they come from poverty-stricken environments, right? The ideal then becomes acquisition. So what making it looks like is the accumulation of tangibles, material objects. So for me to demonstrate that I've made it, I gotta buy a fancier car than all my neighbors them could afford. I have to wear better clothes. I have to build a house in a region that I know these people would never be able to live, right? Those things happen all the time. But if your value system is centered around community in a real way, then that might look like, okay, you've achieved whatever you achieved, but you know, find ways to reach back. So you set up community programs. You know what I mean? You've always been into basketball. Now you're putting on, let's say, a basketball camp or something for the youths every Saturday. Or you identify some ladies in the community and every month you do like a food hamper thing. You pull together some of your friends who are well off are in a better financial position, and you've organized this donation drive, something along those lines, right? That comes from an ideal. The ideal is, how can I build my community? That is the driving force. Whereas in the other example, the driving force is, how do I distance myself? How do I demonstrate that I've arrived?
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean, it's different motivations that fuel some of these things.
But, you know, we kind of went on a tangent a bit, but so we'll go back into the reciprocity again and talk about the relationship from an intimate standpoint as well, right? Because we talked about something about working, like the relationship working. And, you know, it's unfortunate to me sometimes you look at some relationships and stuff, and then people don't really see the relationship as something to nurture continuously and work at. It's almost like the relationship should come out of the box already set.
Pre-assembled.
Done pre-assembled, and, you know, nothing else there to do after this point. But, you know, a relationship is actually like gardening, you know. You got to constantly go and weed out things.
Right.
Because things get overrun very quickly.
Right. And sometimes you need to put on a new layer, topsoil.
A new layer. Yeah.
And sometimes some of the plants that seem to be healthy, you need to pull them up and plant fresh.
Because, I mean, and it's, you got to treat your relationship, to me, from my perspective, for it to be successful, even though you don't really want to see it as, you know, working, but goals take work, right? So I think that you should treat especially some of the core pillars in the relationship, where, you know, let's say the love languages or whatever, you identify them things, and you work at them things with your partner. You work at whatever it is to kind of build the relationship, whether it be support, you know, encouragement, time, touch, all these things has to always be like at the forefront. You know, I got things you might got to compromise on and, you know, make adjustments with and stuff, because everybody kind of grow up differently.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody come from, you know, two worlds, and the two worlds got to kind of merge together. And it's hard sometimes to get seamless. I think people does expect it to be like seamless. Like like, you just imagine two worlds crashing into each other.
And expectations are always problematic in relationships, I find.
Yeah.
I find expectations are incredibly problematic, because what an expectation means is you think your partner should know how to do something, or how to behave, or how to speak to you, or how to treat you, you know, what you're looking for. And some of that would require psychic, for you to be a psychic.
To read
really,
mind.
Yeah, man, to be able to read their mind and identify exactly what they're looking for. And in what I've seen and what I've experienced is sometimes your partner feel like these things self-evident, you know.
Yeah.
They think like, how you ain't that?
Yeah.
Like you've heard me say it 3 days before, but yeah, I hear you say, you spoke about it in a circular way. You touch on it in a surface way, but nothing what you said last week gave me the indication that you're looking for me to do said thing, right? And some of these things happen all the time. And it's how do we identify, okay, what my partner would appreciate and how to integrate it into the way I behave moving forward. Because those things are required in relationships, right? Like sometimes your partner would say something to you and it seems light, right? Like they just drop a sound. Let's say, for instance, is you couldn't pick up the clothes off the wire. And you say, oh, I didn't even think about that. And it's when the rain started to come, I realized that they're out there still, right? Okay, cool. That happened. That's very innocuous. They say it and it's just like poof. But they might have said it in a very understated way. It was low-key for them in the way you received it was very low-key, just based on the tone, the way that they spoke, right? But it could be much, 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 much more serious than that. Because it could have been something that came from the upbringing, and they saw that the mother and the father used to always got friction about, and then they tell themselves they want that in the relationship.
And they might cite this as a possible friction point.
Right. So they're mentioning it You didn't identify it as a red flag, but they identify it as a red flag. And I feel like the maintenance that you talk about is sometimes picking up these little verbal clues and saying, okay, let me pay attention to that. You know?
But
let me make the shift.
But in that scenario though, like, how do you adjust that? Because who responsibility in that case is it to adjust? Because I believe that, like, let's say that it's the same thing, that was a friction point between mommy and daddy growing up. And, you know, like, you have this thing. Let's say you even tell me that you had this with, you know, with mommy and daddy and whatever. You think it's my job to make sure I pick up the clues so you don't have that? It should you should get to adjust that to realize, like, this ain't mommy and daddy.
But
like,
I think we come right back around to the expectation again, because you know, having the expectation that they will be able to identify what their trigger point is, right? And we always talk about control and influence. In that circumstance, the only thing I could control is how I see this, is how I see the dynamic. So yes, she should address her traumas. Wherever her traumas are, those need to be addressed. But I've realized that not picking up the clothes is a trigger point, right? Do I say, okay, we're making them pick up the clothes, I am going to try, but if I drop the ball, then really on me because she need to address the trauma? Yeah, well, that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the proper maintenance of said relationship.
But you see, but it's very tricky, because let's say trigger points are endless. Like, just triggers, like, you don't even know when you're brushing into a trigger.
Well, all you could do is do your best, right? So I think as a man, because I can't speak from the feminine perspective, we look at things a lot more linearly and a lot more direct, right? So there isn't much emotion that is factored in when we're looking at a scenario. We kind of basically look at scenarios based on what they are. Like, okay, the house blew and they need to get painted. But, you know, on the flip side, the assessment might be, the house blew, but I'd kind of like to see the purple because this person here, mommy did tell me a time that she did like this other thing, and, you know? It's like, so you have all of those different data points that they process. We don't process all of that. So, the example that you raised, you identify the trigger point. Yes, there is some trauma, but remember again, is you identify that they have that trauma. Maybe they ain't even
realize it.
Yeah, they ain't even conceptualize it like that. So it means if we're trying to maintain the relationship, you know all you could do. You're just giving it your all.
But you see, I mean, to me, that's from, you know, I always challenge you on this, right? But I think that's from the feminine perspective, not the female perspective, but that's the feminine side of things, to look at things in a nurturing way, like, okay, I identify this, and instead of laying me the masculine, which would be like the more egotistical side, like drive this ship, I can just tap into this other side and just lay this feminine side, and drive the ship, in essence, to kind of find a solution around that, right? Because, you know, the masculine energy will just bulldoze past things, right? Because we always associate that with the masculine. If you bulldoze past something, you're just moving, like, you know. But
I think that's framing, right? It's however you want to frame it.
Yeah.
I think the reality of the situation that I was attempting to explain is whatever frame you want to give it, I think the objective should be a resolution. So if the resolution looks like you understanding there is a trigger and there is a move that you could make to alleviate those sensitivities, then you make those moves. If the sensitivity is, like you were saying, rampant, like you ain't even know where they're coming from. It's just like you're walking on a landmine, right? In a minefield, sorry. If you're walking in a minefield, then that kind of sound more like an eggshells relationship. You're tiptoeing around because everything could be explosive. So that requires now a different level of things.
Because then your partner should also have a perspective, a kind of idea of who you are as well, in essence, right?
Yep.
So, and the world doesn't kind of revolve around them.
No.
So they have to allow you as well to kind of, you know, be yourself it might rub them the wrong way, but they have to identify, like we were saying, some of their traumas as well as along the journey, but not leaving out too that you need space. The other person needs space as well because they got trauma too.
Well, here's the crazy thing, right? Intimate relationships, what I found in intimate relationships is intimate relationships are plagued with expectation. We get to a space where we look for and we expect our partners to be all things for us, right? So, especially if the partner demonstrates certain qualities early on, we start expecting those things, expecting you to do this thing, or to always be there to motivate me, or always be there to push me, or always be there to. And partnership and connection is important, but I think sometimes we put a heavy burden on this other person, expecting them to always be there or show up for us in this particular way. And to some extent, that's kind of unrealistic. I think the purpose of relationship is comfort, companionship, yes, but it doesn't remove your personal responsibility for self-development. Continuing to be the best version of yourself and allowing your partner to experience that, right? So that is the place that I'm getting to know. So I'm not even saying this from, this position of self-actualization, but rather as an evolving human being and finding out, sometimes when you put expectations on somebody to be something, it usually leads to unhappiness and discomfort. Because I don't think anybody could truly meet our mark. This arbitrary mark that we set up, like, okay, ATIBA is X person's partner, and she just has all of these expectations of ATIBA. ATIBA should do this, ATIBA should move this particular way. This is the expectation that I have for ATIBA to communicate in this way for me. Okay, so then what then happens when he doesn't communicate in the way that you expect him to? Or he doesn't do the thing that you expect him to do? You feel hurt. And that's problematic. So while we look for our partners to behave how we want them to behave, or how, to treat us how we would want to be treated, we also have to not have such high expectations, because I think they invariably lead to sadness.
As time passes on, in relationships and stuff like that, sometimes it feels as though you need to always be at. We should probably read the book a bit and then chop it up a bit about the 5 levels of attachment.
Okay.
Because sometimes I think that we need to always have a gear of like being between a level 1, a 2, and a 3 at max. Because that would allow you to accept people as they evolve and certain expectations. But I think that is important for both people to be on the same page as it relates to certain just on the base, at the base level, be on the same page, you know, and you can have your own identity, do your own thing and stuff like that, because you can. It's harder to say that to control how somebody kind of behaves, because it's so much things working against within that, not against within that person, that you can't really know, because you can't really know somebody 100%, because you never lived you never lived their experience, so you don't even see the world fully from their perspective.
Right.
So sometimes you have to kind of like give grace and just be patient.
But that's hard to do,
And that's,
especially if you've created ideals. So you have these ideas. Because, listen, all of us, right? I mean, okay, if we're driven in that way, at least. Let me not say all of us. But for the most part, a lot of the persons that I know and that I interact with, they've shaped their lives mentally. Like, the things that they do now are things that they wanted to do, or if they got into a particular profession, they have ideals, they have goals about where they want to reach, who they want to be. They have these goals about who their partner should be in their life, how that person should represent them, how they want to represent that person, what type of car. You know, we set up these metrics.
these traps.
Right, for achievement, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, again, nobody would ever be able to do those things for us and meet that mark that we set. So it's like that Bruce Lee quote, you have to be like water, flexible, fluid. Like if water goes into the cup, it becomes the cup. If it goes into a mug, it becomes the mug, right? If it flows through the hose, it takes the shape of the hose. So it's almost like being flexible in that way with people and realizing that people are also fallible, just like we are fallible, because I've made a ton of mistakes. And there was a point in time where I felt like other person's mistakes were more gross than mine's. Like, how you make that mistake? But they operate on a different frequency. Some of the things that I did, they might look at it as things that they would never do ever in their life, right? So it's, you know, just realizing that human beings are human beings, and you have to accept people for who they are,
But you know,
and based on how they come.
But you know, the Stoic principle is to be strict with yourself and tolerant with others.
Yeah.
Because once you understand that you know, people, you know.
But it's crazy because when you're strict with yourself, you're usually strict with others.
But that's,
And I know that for a fact, because I have a lot of high ideals for myself. And because of those high ideals that I have, I kind of project those onto people. I have the ability to project them onto people.
But and that's the part you got to, as a person, that we all have to manage. How we manage our projections, because suddenly the projection is it's too heavy.
Yeah, man, it's too strong.
Too strong.
And so to that point, I've found that previously, now I'm seeing a little, yeah, it's a weird balance. But what I did is because I had a lot of rigid expectations of myself, right? I had similar rigid expectations of people. And what it did is it forced people, and I use the word force intentionally, it forced people who were close to me to show me a version of themselves that wasn't wholly true. So not saying